Adam heard voices. Not distinct words or phrases, but several voices tumbling together like the water in a trickling brook. The sounds as inseparable as myriad rustling leaves or a multitude of deer crossing the tundra. He could make out giggles and the pattern of individual words, but their meaning was lost in the consortium of sounds. His ears focused on a thunderous rush. At this distance he could only guess what it could be. A stampeding herd? Then, as he searched for the cause, he saw a mist rising above the trees. It was a waterfall. What luck, Adam thought. Settlements were generally near a water source. He would just have to follow the river downstream to find a settlement and go from there on to the Chaldees. He began climbing a grassy embankment. Twigs cracked and snapped under his feet, the sound lost in that of the crashing water. Crouching to peek over the crest, Adam let his eyes follow the stick-like tree trunks to the ground and from the ground to the edge of the rushing river. The water bubbled and frothed, rushing and dipping between jutting rocks before whirling dizzily into the relative calmness of the open river, only to be captured and pushed over a submerged embankment and flushed further down the waterway, which eventually disappeared around a wooded bend. Adam's eyes moved slowly and methodically up and down the river, seeking the source of the voices. Just below him and a little to his left was a massive tree log, suspended above the water. The base of its mammoth trunk had splintered, and the top of the tree rested on the far bank. Just beyond it, he glimpsed two figures before they disappeared into the brush on the other side of the river. Adam feared that he'd have to traverse the tree bridge. The thought of the furious river below made him giddy. He looked skyward, hoping to be given a sign, yet he already knew what he had to do. He had to walk across that felled tree. He opened his case and pulled out the bottle. Foregoing the red-stained chalice, he uncorked the bottle and raised it to his mouth. The recorked bottle went into one of his pockets, the chalice in the other pocket. Then, before his fear resurfaced, he half climbed, half slid down the gravel and rock slope to a rock embankment above the river. Adam removed his shoes and climbed on top of the log bridge in his bare feet. He mustered up his faith, prayed with the zealous vigor he possessed as a young monk, and crept across the log. His focus wavered from the large trunk only once, his eyes involuntarily sliding past the bark underfoot to the blur of rushing water below him. Adam dropped to his feet, not in prayer, but in fear of falling into the swirling white water below. But since he was only kneeling, he did decide to pray for forgiveness of his actual and imagined sins, and request the strength to continue safely to the other side. A miracle happened, or so Adam thought. He no longer heard the rushing river, no longer felt the rough bark scraping his knee or his calloused feet. He felt only the peace that came with surrendering his will, and the serenity of relinquishing all responsibility and fear for the consequences of success or failure. Then the Creator returned him to the present with a thud. Adam's foot caught on the hem of his habit, and he fell off the log onto the mossy embankment. He didn't know why, but in those seconds of the fall, he realized his deceit. Adam opened an eye and gazed at a rock that his head had missed by inches. It was actually no larger than an apple, but his perspective enlarged the rock, and the rounded edges took a more sinister and sharper quality. He slowly dragged himself to his feet and looked behind him at his route to this side. He had very little recollection of traversing the rest of the bridge and the fall, which he'd mistakenly interpreted as his prayer being answered. Still a little shaken, he put on his shoes and limped into the pine and spruce forest. The aroma of the sap quickly surrounded him, and the fear and shakiness he'd experienced during the episode began to dissipate. Adam trekked through clumps of trees and stumbled over bent and snapped tree branches. He stepped through pitch-colored mud and sloshed through ankle-deep water. His hair and beard collected dead and moss-laden twigs, crawling black flies and curled dry leaves. He swatted back branches that slapped his face and neck. When it became too much for him, he covered his head with his arms and plowed through the forest, remembering that his faith had got him past the danger of the log bridge, and what he currently experienced was nothing more than an inconvenience. When his route was relatively clear of trees and overhanging branches, Adam brushed the forest debris from his beard and his habit, and emptied his hood of accumulated kindling only to push through another patch of brush that filled his hood once again and clung to his habit once more. And then the worst possible thing happened. 2 native children spotted Adam pushing through the forest, and without hesitation, thinking that he was an animal or even worse, one of the many monsters that inhabited the deep woods, ran back to their tribe for help. As he heard the youngsters' screams, Adam roared and ran in the opposite direction, reinforcing the belief that he was a monster out to eat them. He hoped that their elders would not take their young imaginations seriously. Adam didn't relish the idea of being hunted down like an animal. At last he stopped and leaned against a tree to catch his breath. He wheezed with each inhalation and coughed on each exhale. In his younger days he was quick to fight to defend his faith, but as the years enlarged his waist and his heart, and diminished his lung capacity, he only picked the battles that he knew he could win. Adam was comfortable with his self-image as the hard hand of faith. It was clerics like him to whom the church owed the increase in their flocks. He had studied the martial arts of the Buddhists and had used the skill to fight for his faith. His church didn't sanction fighting unless instructed by the Holy Padre, and in defense of the Holy Faith, of course. But Adam felt that physical violence was not totally incompatible with the Holy Scriptures. After all, was not Satan's expulsion from heaven an act of violence? And was not David striking Goliath violent as well? These were prime examples of the choice that both clerics and practitioners must make. Everything about his surroundings begun to look the same, and Adam feared that he would lose his way. The longer he stayed out in the woods, the greater the risk he'd run across some unsuspecting native whose impulsive reaction would get Adam injured or killed. He wasn't ready to die alone on this unknown continent. Adam came upon a clearing peppered with moss-covered rocks. Unable to shake the feeling that some unknown assailant was pursuing him, he neither paused nor stopped. He wasn't paying attention to where he was going and almost fell off a wall of rock. At the last second, he noticed that the mossy ground that he'd been walking across, and which he had mistaken for the forest floor, was actually the top of a rock cliff. He immediately backed away from the ledge. Peering over the cliff, Adam saw that he was standing over a cave opening. There were voices coming from inside the cavern. A moment later, 3 natives and someone that Adam presumed to be a Chaldee exited the cave. The father was not dressed like the other Chaldee monk that he'd seen days earlier. "Father, what can we do for you?" the natives asked in Latin. "Return to the camp. I will meet you there shortly." Adam snuck closer to the ledge and watched the natives walk down a trail and disappear into the bush, leaving the monk by himself. He was a large, imposing figure, even from Adam's vantage. The monk just stood there looking out across the forest. Adam got up on all fours. His fat belly brushed along the ground as he slowly backed away from the ledge, knocking a fine curtain of dirt and rocks over the edge. The father whirled around and looked up. "Who's there?" Adam's body hugged the ground. He didn't move. He hardly even breathed. Like a child avoiding scolding elders, he remained hidden. "Show yourself!" In a split second of realization, Adam decided that staying hidden was foolish. This was his chance to reveal himself in a calm and non-threatening manner. He stood and walked back over to the edge. "I am Adam of Bremen," he unintentionally bellowed as he looked down. "You are not from this colony." "No, I've traveled across the ocean." The monk's expression changed from scowling suspicion to one of almost elated trust. "Adam of Bremen, I am happy to meet you. My prayers have been answered."